join us up here, then maybe you can have.
Do you want me just to go now?
Or maybe you can have a go. You can.
I can go now.
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
Either way.
Great. So maybe
from the back.
Okay, so I'll just go now. I'm with Action Keele, the Socialist Project's Action Keele campaign, and I'm thrilled to be here. I'm thrilled that so many of you came, and I'm very happy to have the support of these other important groups of the city that are also doing such important work. We have been canvassing on the 41 bus for the past month or 2 months every week to talk to people and hear their concerns about the bus system, to try to figure out what we can do to build some kind of collective force to change the way that the bus runs, which we all know is terrible. And we're committed to building that power in this community here along the Keele corridor. And so the question is how we do that. Well, we start from the conviction that really decades of free market policies have been ruinous for working class people in this city. Continuous rounds of austerity cuts to social services have left us with public services that are completely inadequate and too expensive. And I think we can all relate to that. And the bus is just one more example of that. These policies have failed to provide decent incomes and good jobs. These policies have failed to provide adequate and affordable housing. And these policies have failed to provide adequate transportation. So it's the failed policies of austerity that we need to confront fundamentally. And one way in which that operates is in transit. So that's a first step for us. So we're promised greater choice through the market. But what we see when we look all around is that we working people have fewer choices than ever before. As our wages have been going down for 30 years, if you just look at the data, 30 years people's wages have stagnated or declined. We have fewer choices about where to live, fewer choices about what to eat, fewer choices about where to go, and fewer choices about who to socialize with. But there is another way. And we need to begin by rejecting the politics of hopelessness that tells us that there is no alternative. And we need to instead embrace a politics of hope. And we need to believe that we can challenge austerity and push back when we come together and start to fight. So transit for us is a crucial part of this, and because it's such a central part of the lives of working people, not just in Toronto, not just in the Keele route, but everywhere. We take transit to do anything, to go to work, to do our shopping, to spend time with our friends. And the transit infrastructure in the city is the way that the city is connected or not connected. And those are very, very important aspects of where we can go and when we can go there. What routes are built or not built? What lines are maintained or not maintained? What lines are serviced or not serviced? Who has to wait the longest and who has the quickest service? Well, if you want to go to the mall downtown, or if you want to go to a major employer, you can usually get fairly quick service. In fact, the subways are set up to go to those places. But the lines like the number 41 bus, which I have to take regularly, and which many of us in this room I'm sure take, which working people use for themselves, are the worst in the system. So increasingly, it's hard to go outside and do anything and be social without spending money. The transit system is expensive, but even public spaces, like to go to a public space like a park or this library, you have to increasingly pay a lot to take the transit system, or you have to take a privatized form of transit like your car or a taxi or an Uber. The ability to get there for free or for cheap or for an affordable cost is increasingly eroded. So public transit actually makes these community spaces like the library, like the park, like places that you can go to and spend time without having to necessarily pay, it makes those spaces more accessible for everyone. And so that's what we have to be concerned about. Transit costs primarily fall on workers. Unlike other cities, 70% of the operating budget of the TTC comes from what people pay at the fare box. Now what that means is that whether you make $1 million a day or whether you make $10 an hour, you pay the same amount for every ride for the transit system. And since the poor and the workers use it the most, they actually end up paying the most for the system. So that is completely unfair. Under the question we have to ask ourselves is, how do we make sure that the rich pay their fair share and that public services are provided for everyone? Now, I don't have to tell most people here, I don't think, that in the inner suburbs the problems are particularly bad. There's no coincidence that these are communities where working class people live. But in the inner suburbs, everything is further apart, and we need transit even more than they need it elsewhere to get around, to connect these spaces that are farther apart from each other. And yet we get the worst service. Okay, so the interesting thing, if you look at the way that the transit system in the inner suburbs is set up, is that it connects these suburbs to the downtown core, but not to each other. If you want to go from the inner suburbs to the downtown, no problem, it's very easy. But if you want to move around within the inner suburbs, that's incredibly difficult. You have to wait a long time, you have to take crappy buses. So we need to address that. And again, that's not a coincidence. It's set up that way because that's the way the system works. We have to fight back against that. This has the effect of destroying communities, and it makes it harder to make our own neighborhoods desirable places to live and spend time. Everything, all the lively parts of life, as my friend Sadia put it the other day, all the lively parts of life happen downtown. There's nothing lively, there's nothing exciting, there's nothing desirable happening in the inner suburbs. It's hard to get around. So our communities here are continuously left behind. And if you go downtown, it's like a completely different city. You wouldn't even know you're in the same city. I mean, it's literally like culture shock. Okay, so just to conclude, because I don't want to go on for too long, but the Action Keele group, which is what the Socialist Project's Action Keele campaign, we think we need to change this. And we think this begins by reimagining the city and our community's place within the city. And we start from the conviction that we can push back against austerity. When we work together, especially with bus drivers, I mean, the bus drivers have the ATU, the Amalgamated Transit Union, which is a relatively strong union. You know, it's currently running a campaign called Keep Transit Public, which hopefully offer us some ways to collaborate. But the important point is that when we work together with bus drivers, we're in a much stronger position because their working conditions are our public services. The more good jobs and the better working conditions that the bus drivers have, the better services we get. So we need to team up with the drivers in order to start building a way to fight back against continuous austerity and continuous cuts. So I just want to close by emphasizing, and along lines with what Jonah just said, is that it's not just transit alone that's the issue here, although that's where we want to start, and as I've mentioned, it's very, very important to working people. But we need to see this as part of a broader plan to build a brighter future for everyone in the city. And that includes things like a living wage, that includes things like better and more affordable housing, that includes things like the need to protect and expand healthcare. You mentioned Ford. Certainly will be trying to attack and cut our healthcare program. So we need to protect and expand healthcare, and we need to improve education. Those are all just a beginning of some of the issues that we have to take on, and transit, I think, is a particularly important one. But the important point that I want to leave with here is that when we come together, we are capable of making a difference. And I hope that we can see some of you again at our future events and as canvassers on our Action Keele campaign. So thanks for coming.
Thanks, Steve. So on to our last speaker from the ATU, the Amalgamated Transit Union, so the Union of Bus Drivers and Operators.
Yeah, I'm Deborah Littman. I'm I'm the organizer for ATU 113, which is the local that covers all TTC workers and some privatized workers in York Region, sadly. So I want to say a couple of things about that. I'm really pleased to hear you talking about working with bus drivers because obviously they are the ones delivering the service, and beyond just the need to work with them, they know a lot about how the service works. One of the things that I've often found in working on transit campaigns is you can design them in a vacuum, and then you sit down with a bus driver and they go, well, that wouldn't work, and here's why, but here's what would work. And I have a wonderful experience going out and meeting with politicians we've got a Keep Transit Public team, a group of 14 rank and file workers that have been booked off. They come from both maintenance and operations, and it's always brilliant to sit in a room with them because they know the story. So just an example, we met with an MP in Scarborough just recently, pretty right-leaning, Mayor Tory supporting MP, long time been there a long time, and he was very frustrated with the transit in Scarborough, and he was almost at the point, hated Ford, but he said, I'm almost at the point of saying okay to the upload if it'll get shovels in the ground. And we were able to say, whoa, let's talk about what the upload would really mean. So the proposal of Premier Ford to upload the subway to the province. And this is a really serious threat, and I would say before you even think about the 41, make sure that we don't lose the subway. And we can talk more about that. But he really didn't know. He didn't know, for example, that at the time when subway operations or TTC operations were almost fully funded by the province, efficiency was way higher. Okay? One of the big problems we have is that operations, not just infrastructure, not building a new line, not building a new subway, but actually running the system, is that funding got cut. And Harris took it away, and so that's why 70% now comes from the fare box, which means you've got to pay for it instead of the province paying for it, and it's flat rate, and it's a regressive tax on the poor, but it also means it's never enough. So we've got mechanics that are rebuilding buses and streetcars to make them last longer. They should be 12 years. They're keeping them going for 18, and then you've got a TTC buying stuff from private companies that is a disaster. Bombardier streetcars they were supposed to be delivered, and then they were fewer and fewer were going to be delivered, and then the welds were wrong, and they had to all
And
be
they
sent
keep
back.
being bailed up by the federal government.
Absolutely.
Because they're,
Yeah.
also in Quebec.
Yeah, and what we were able to say, and it was fascinating to see his face as my colleague Corey Branch, who's a streetcar mechanic, explained it. He said, the new streetcars don't have a pivot truck in the middle. They have one at the front, they have one at the back. Now think about this. You know how long those things are, right?
Yeah.
So it's going around a corner, and the front pivots and the back pivots, but the middle doesn't pivot, which means it can't go very fast. It has to go quite slowly, otherwise it's going to derail. And also it swings way out into traffic, which slows traffic, but also means that there are actually routes it can't run on because the corner is too tight. Now that's just a little
Nothing
bit
like
of
good
information,
planning, right?
but the important thing is that our members know that stuff, right? They know how few cars are being delivered to the yards. It turns out that they're now being delivered like almost half done, and to be finished off by TTC workers, even though Bombardier is getting the money. So it's a bit like going to a bakery and they give you a loaf half baked and say, you finish it off in your oven, right? And that's kind of what's going on. So hang on, can I finish? So this is the knowledge that our workers have, our mechanics, our drivers, our fare staff. We could talk about Presto from now till doomsday. I'll tell you lots of terrible stories. But the point is, they have the kind of internal knowledge that is really important if you're going to, one, plan a campaign, and two, come up with concrete proposals that make some sense. So you're putting forward something that will actually fly rather than just something that they can dismiss out of hand. So I would say that dialogue's really important. The second thing is the threat to the TTC is very real. It's bad enough. We've had a rough time and funding and cuts and everything else, but we're now looking at a province that wants to, as we've said, upload the subway, which would pull it out of the whole system. Now they're saying, oh, it's just so that we can carry the debt, that'll be helpful, and TTC will run it and treat, and they'll get the revenue. But actually, if you take a very highly integrated system, and it is highly integrated, and you pluck out one part of that and put it under another authority, it's going to cause administrative chaos, confusion, duplication, and probably higher costs. And the most terrifying thing is that it will open the door to privatization. Once that piece of and as the most profitable part of the system is uploaded, all the dreck gets left behind, the things you have to ride all the time, and then let's look at who gets that. Eglinton Crosstown, the maintenance has already been contracted out to a consortium that includes SNC Lavalin. Anyone know anything about
Oh,
SNC?
we all know who they are.
Yeah, they've just been hit with a suit because of previous fraud and corruption. Okay,
Who granted that?
the government.
Yes, but
well,
which
well
one?
Metrolinx. I mean, it was the previous provincial government that did, and they were very keen on P3s. Our Keep Transit Public campaign started by fighting that, but now we're really in the fight of our lives around the upload. So I just want to say one quick thing about that, and then I just want to say a couple of other things about tactics. So we really need to fight that. We've got a petition online. You can go to wemovetoronto.ca and sign that petition, or it's also on the TTC Riders site.
There's a copy over there on the table.
Yeah, we want hundreds of thousands of signatures on that, and we're also trying to support progressive candidates. We have a pledge that we've asked them to sign saying keep transit public. We had a motion that we put through City Council just before it dissolved for that last session, pledging to keep transit public. So we're really hoping that we get some of those people elected, and then we hold their feet to the fire in terms of trying to at least put some sand in the gears of the provincial government breaking up the TTC. Now, I just want to say a couple of things about tactics. I'm really pleased with the idea that you're going up and down Keele and asking people, not telling them, not saying, here's our pamphlet, please, here are our issues, but saying, what do you care about? What's going on? How do you react to this bus? What would make it better? And then, I hope, crafting concrete proposals that we can take to City Council, to the Transit Commission, to the decision makers with a really strong, unified voice behind it. One of the things that happens, and I come quite recently from Vancouver, where I was lead organizer of a broad-based community organization, and we worked a lot on transit, is that there's a whole process of what's called consultation, right? Consultation. They did more of it in Vancouver. So you get this thing from the city saying, we want to consult you about whether there should be a new bike lane down Broadway, and then you'd say, please answer this Survey Monkey form and tell us. Now, what will always happen is they set the parameters of that consultation. They decide what questions are going to get asked. They decide, which answers you're allowed to give them. And then your answer goes into this black hole. You don't have a chance to talk to anyone else about it or hear what other people's opinions are. And then they say, oh, thank you very much for your input. And they come up with whatever they were going to probably come up with in the first place. And you have no idea whether 90% of people said, no, we don't want that, because you don't control that consultation. So one of the things that's really important to do is to do our own consultation. That's what we called a listening campaign or house meetings. And I would say that the kind of thing where you bring people together in a room, you say, here's an outline of what we're concerned about. Now let's talk about, what's your experience and what concrete proposals would you think would make it better, and what are you prepared to do? Right? Not just this passive, hi, I went to a meeting, went home. What are you prepared to do? Would you talk to your neighbor? Would you go back to an organization you belong to and see whether they'd be interested? So the point is we need to come up with proposals that really do grab people, because what happens over and over again, and I'm sure everybody's been in this, somebody comes up and they say, hey, I've got a petition, I've got an issue, here, will you sign it? And you read it and you go, yeah, that looks okay. And then we wonder why you didn't come out to the meeting. Did we ask you? Does that matter to you? Is that 99th on your priority list as opposed to 1? No, we've just assumed that it's important to me, so it must be important to you. We have to make sure that the people that, are really coming up with things that matter to them, and they're willing to follow that up and come out and take sometimes months, years to win that battle, not just say, oh, well, I went to one meeting, that's enough. Okay. The second thing is that We need to look beyond the usual suspects. And I'm glad to hear that people are doing that. But I do worry a little bit. Since I've been in this city, I've seen, half a dozen rallies at Queen's Park. I go to those rallies at Queen's Park, and it's the same 200 people. And we're talking to each other, and we all go, hi, yeah, I saw you at the last one. And we are not talking, and especially if you're talking inner suburbs. You know, we have hundreds of thousands of people that are not connected to any of those activist groups or any of those campaign groups. They live their lives, they do their stuff. But they're probably connected to something else. They're connected to a faith organization, they're connected to a sports club, they're connected to a community center, they're connected to something to do with their kids' school. And that's where they actually have some energy and some time to put their effort in. So we need to be talking to leaders of those organizations and actually following the track of our own members. Like, we've got 11,500 members in ATU, actively employed at the moment. We have people that belong to mosques and people that belong to churches, and we have people that go to community centers and people that play soccer, and they have roles in those organizations that they can bring us to. And we've done quite a lot of that. And in fact, I've just written while I was uploading the subway about idea for a mosque that asked for it. We went there through some members of ours, and they said, we'd really like something that we can show to our members. Could you produce something? And what we discovered is, of course, they have an interest. Now, their interest may be different. One of their interests is they have a lot of TTC employees in their congregation. Those good jobs, those family supporting good jobs are really important to them, right? They don't want to lose them, but they probably haven't thought about it in terms of fighting privatization of transit. It hasn't, that connection has been made. Or a lot of them are transit dependent, right? But they may not have ever said, actually that means we should be transit activists, right? We have to help make that connection. But going out and having those conversations, not just with individuals, but with institutions, because those institutions have weight. They have clout when they come together, and they really bring a depth to a campaign that we're not going to have with the same 200 people that show up at Queen's Park every time. So those are the two things that I would really advise, and I would be really excited to work with you on the campaign, because I think it sounds like a really good one. And thank you.
Thanks.
That was great, thank you.